Hello, I'm Gwen Hill from Pine Ridge Baptist Church Sunday School Department Ladies Class, and we are in Exodus doing a chapter by chapter study of that book, and today we are in chapter 21 and verse 22. About had me confused there. God has given the 10 Commandments to this 2.5 million people, this people that have never been a nation before. Then they've always been under subjugation by Egypt, and they have always had to follow Egypt's rules, and Egypt has always informed them of what to do and when to do it. And now they are free from Egypt. God wants to make them into an efficient nation, one that will honor Him. So the rules that we are getting here today, the laws that God has given, are not only for everyone, the 10 Commandments, but they are for the forming of a nation that's starting from bedrock, if you will. They are numerically right to go in and get the promised land, but togetherness and orderly, they are not. They are not equipped and they are not ready for that. And God is taking them to school. He's teaching them through Moses how to have a government and how the rules of the land are supposed to work. Moses, by Jethro's suggestion and God's agreement, has already set into motion having their elders of each tribe over them. They have had, since they left Egypt, they have had the oldest son of each family clan become acting priest, if you will. That's going to end in a few chapters, but right now that's what it is. And these men are not only their priests and their elders, but it's also called their judges. So now Moses is on the top of Mount Sinai, and he's talking with God, and God is teaching him how to instruct the judges. He's not booming and talking to them from the top of the mountain as he was a week or so ago in our studies, because that frightened the people so much. They begged Moses to please go talk to God, and then you come back and tell us what he said, and we'll obey and we'll do that. But if we have to listen to God, it's frightful to us and we'll never survive it. I think for a sinful person like myself and like you, to hear the awesome, powerful voice of God without knowing His Son would be a very fearful thing. And they could only see and hear that fear. They missed seeing and hearing the God that loves them to distraction. So he's been giving them some case studies. He says something along the lines of, "Thou shalt not murder." And then he gives instances where if a murder occurs, you're to judge it such in this manner. And today we're going to see that he not only is concerned about women, but he is concerned about the unborn. And they make a difference to him being God. In verse 22, we'll start out. "If men fight and hurt a woman with child so that she gives birth prematurely, yet no harm follows, he shall surely be punished according as the woman's husband imposes on him, and he shall pay as the judges determine. But if any harm follows, then you shall give life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, stripe for stripe." Okay, what he's talking originally about, in my imagination, two men getting into a fight. And my imagination has her going, because we're not really told, has her going in to try to separate them. Maybe she's concerned that she doesn't want her husband to get hurt. Maybe it's something else, but she's pregnant. In the process of trying to break up these two men, she's hurt. She's thrown to the ground. She's knocked across the room. She's hit with something, and it causes her to go into preterm labor. So what God is telling Moses, he said, you judge, tell the judges to judge. It is the law of retaliation. The idea is that life for life and eye for eye and tooth for a tooth was to limit punishment, not to prescribe punishment, but to limit it. And he's saying, if no harm has happened to the woman or her child, then the husband can say what he wants. The person who hurt his wife to have to pay. But he's telling that to the judges. And the judges will hear the case, and the judges will set a fee for him to pay. This adage where he's talking about all the things like eye for eye and a tooth for a tooth. I told my class this morning, I said, many years ago, we were broken into. We were broken into during the daytime hours, and neither one of us was home. I was furious when I got home. It was in January. They had left my door wide open. It was 10 degrees outside. Could have been disastrous for our home. And he stole my camera, which had my Christmas pictures on it that I had not taken off yet. And my instinct reaction, gut reaction, was if I had a gun, I'd shoot him. And I wasn't going to hear anything else. I was so angry. But that wouldn't have followed this rule, an eye for an eye. He stole the camera, but I was going to shoot him. So this rule that God is doing is one of equity. You don't punish stronger than the offense. And that was the bar he was holding up. Justice. Not fulfilling my hurt feelings, but justice. Then he goes on in verse 26 and 27. If a man strikes the eye of his male or female servant and destroys it, he shall let him go free for the sake of his eye. If he knocks out the tooth of his male or female servant, he shall let him go free for the sake of his tooth. First of all, I want you to notice that God is holding both the male and the female servant as equals. Isn't that wonderful? In this day and time, that didn't happen. Women had a very low place in society. As low as they were in the Hebrew families, they were much, much lower in the Egyptian families, much, much lower in all of the tribes around them that they would be traveling through. So God isn't putting women down here. He's actually holding them up. So God is trying to get across to Moses that this ruling is a good way to influence the behavior of the master. In this case that we're studying, this is Hebrew law for Hebrews. And if I was the master and I had a Hebrew slave, that is the relationship they're talking about here. Most of the Hebrew slaves that were Hebrew came to be a slave because it was a willing thing. They got paid for their services up front. The master bought them. Maybe they used that money to pay off creditors. Maybe they used that money to pay for an offense that they had done. Or maybe they had to work for this man to pay off one of the offenses that he had incurred against him. It was unusual in the Hebrew society that anyone, they could serve any time from a day, a week, a month, up to 6 years, but they couldn't serve more than 6 years. At the beginning of the 7th year, they were turned free. So if I'm the master and my slave has done something that I think they need discipline for, or I get angry at the slave for whatever reason, or to the servant, and I strike them, if I cause them to lose their eyesight in an eye, I have to free them. So I'm losing. I'm losing the work, the labor of the servant. I'm also losing the money from up front that if I had to pay for that servant. So it would make me think twice before I become physical with my servants if they knocked out a tooth. That's a permanent disability, knocking out a tooth or knocking out an eye. That's not something they're going to rest and get over with in a day or two. That's a permanent disability, so they are going to be set free. It would really go a long way toward governing the behavior of the master. Verse 33, restitution. We're going to talk about something that occurred because of my negligence, and I need to make restitution to the injured party. In verse 33, and if a man opens a pit, or if a man digs a pit and does not cover it, and an ox or a donkey falls in it, the owner of the pit shall make it good. He shall give money to their owner, but the dead animal shall be his. I asked in my class, does anyone have a swimming pool? Did you know that your swimming pool, if you have one, is called an attractive nuisance under your insurance? It is, because a lot of things go bad around a swimming pool. You could be gone away from home, be gone on vacation, be gone for the whole week, and you've locked the gates around your swimming pool. You've done everything possible you can to go away and leave that in a safe, leave that as a safe environment. But I want to swim in your swimming pool, so I come over and I circumvent every safety thing you had, and I got into your pool and I was injured. Your insurance will tell you you have an attractive nuisance. It's going to attract people, to entice them. Well, this is not really enticing someone, but it's the same kind of deal. He made a pit for whatever reason, we're not told. They made pits to store grain in. They made pits to confine other things in. They opened up caves and made pits and caves so that they could have a cool place to keep produce and that kind of thing. But for whatever reason, to trap animals in was another reason. This owner made a pit, dug a pit, and then he, for whatever reason, he walked off and left it. He didn't fill it in. He didn't put a fence around it. He didn't warn with signage or anything else. Hey, here's a pit, be careful. Not that animals can read that, but it can warn the owners of the animals to keep their animals away from that area if they know about it. And in this case, this fella, an ox fell in. Well, an ox back in their day was like having a big John Deere tractor. And their livelihood depended on them being able to grow crops and that kind of things. And those oxen really helped them do that. So if you killed a man's ox, you really hurt his ability to feed his family. It was a big deal. So this ox wanders over, because oxes don't read signs, even if he had a sign up, and he fell into the pit and it killed him. And the owner, the judges needed to compensate the owner of the ox. So what the judges are supposed to do is they are to pay the man who owned the pit is to pay the owner, and the dead animal will be the owner of the pits. It's like he just went out and bought the animal. Buying the animal gives the farmer another chance to go buy him another ox. In verse 35 and 36, if one man's ox hurts another so that it dies, then they shall sell the live ox and divide the money from it, and the dead ox they shall also divide. This is two oxen that decided that they didn't like one another. They had a fight, and one of them hurts the other so badly that it dies. Well, what are we going to do? We don't really know who's at fault here, which ox started the confrontation or what, but all we know is there stands a live ox and there lays a dead one. So what they're going to do is they're going to sell the live ox, and they are going to split the money that they get for it. They are going to take the dead ox and slaughter it, and half an ox goes to each family. It's equitable as they can get in this situation. But if it was known in verse 36, or if it was known that the ox tended to thrust in times past, then its owner has not been kept it confined. He shall surely pay ox for ox, and the dead animal shall be his own. Any time that you know that an animal that you own is dangerous for other people, it puts a huge responsibility on you to contain that animal so that no other human is injured by your animal. And if that animal does hurt a human, then you are responsible, even if you weren't there, if you knew it and you didn't do anything about it. Chapter 22, we're going to talk about thievery. If a man steals an ox or a sheep, and he slaughters it or sells it, he shall restore 5 oxen for an ox and 4 sheep for a sheep. The fact that he stole it, that he hid out, he killed it, and he butchered it, and he sold the meat, tells you that he had planned to do that. That was not an accidental thing. He was an archer, and he was aiming for a bird, and somehow or another he hit your ox. The fact that he butchered it on the spot and that he went and sold the meat tells you he had a plan in place. When you have a plan to do evil against your neighbor, you're going to pay highly for it. Oxen was the most expensive animal that they had during this particular time. And so to really drive a point through, said, you kill his ox, you owe him 5 more. And if you kill a sheep, one of his sheep, because they're much less expensive, you're going to pay him 4 more. So it's either 400% or 500% more. And then we go in verse 2. If a thief is found breaking in and he is struck so that he dies, there shall be no guilt for his bloodshed. He's breaking in at night. It's dark. It's not the dark like we have now. In my house, if I turned out all the lights, I would still have all kinds of red and blue electronic little lights flashing. I have electric lamps that I've even got one that all I have to do is touch it and the lights will come on. I have outside security lights. It's really hard to get really dark where I live. But where they lived, at night, it got very dark. And their houses were made of like adobe. And if a thief is found breaking in, he's chipping through that adobe to try to get in your house. You can't see him. And you don't know if he has a club in his hands that his plan is to do away with you and your family. You don't know what kind of instrument he has or what's on his mind, but he's very determined. So you can retaliate because you're fearful, because you're defending your family. And there's no guilt in that at all. But in verse 3, there's a caveat. If the sun has risen on him, there shall be guilt for his bloodshed. He should make full restitution, and if he has nothing, then he shall be sold for his theft. It's daytime, and you catch him. If he's still got the things that he stole, you take them back. You take them back, and he's going to make restitution, the value of what he stole. If I stole, in today's time, if I stole your camera, I would have to give you back your camera, plus I would have to buy you another one, or the money to buy another one. But if he didn't have anything, if this thief was very broke, he didn't have anything, then he's going to have to be sold as a slave to recompense you for his thievery. In verse 4, if the theft is certainly found alive in his hand, whether it's an ox or donkey or a sheep, he shall restore double. Restitution is a payment made to somebody or the giving of an equivalent value to compensate them for damages or for loss. These people live by agriculture. And verse 5 and 6 says, if a man causes a field or a vineyard to be grazed and lets loose his animal and it feeds on another man's field, he shall make restitution from the best of his own field and the best of his own vineyard. If a fire breaks out and catches the thorns so that stacked grain, standing grain, or the field is consumed, he who kindled the fire will surely make restitution. If I had a vineyard or I had a field, a crop in the field, and my neighbor turns loose his animals to come into my field, they're stealing food from my family, because that's the way I supported my family. I would take him before the judges, and the judges would look at it and say, was it intentional or was it accidental? The least that would happen would be he would have to make restitution for what had been damaged. If I had caused $1,000 worth of damage to the field, I owe the man $1,000. That's the least it'd be. If it was through negligence that I just didn't care what my animals did, then I would have to provide at least double what had been ruined. This was people's lives. What it talks about in verse 6, if fire breaks out and catches in the thorns, to protect their fields a lot of times, especially when they had already stacked the grain or piled it up, there was a lot of thorns in this area. They would gather up thorns and make like a hedgerow of thorns around the produce that they were trying to save. And if I was negligent, if I started a fire over here for whatever reason and I let it get away or let it get out from me, or through meanness I just lit a fire. I wanted to make marshmallows. They didn't have them. But you see what I'm saying? I could be just careless, negligent, and it got those thorns ablaze, and then it took the produce. It took the stacked grain that I had. That was what I was going to feed my family. Then the man who started the fire would have to pay restitution. Well, that's all we got through in Sunday school today. Next week, I hope to finish chapter 22. I hope this is not boring to you. I think it's fascinating how much of the United States law was based on the precepts that we are reading in Exodus. It's amazing to me how our God wanted these people to be so different. He wanted to be just people. He wanted them to look at each person as worthy, each person's life as being important. And you can see that if you look in these laws that God is teaching Moses to teach the judges. See you next week. Have a good week.